Okay, well, let's get started then. So what is a performance appraisal? Just a way of communicating to the employee, letting them know how they're doing, and also establishing a plan for improvement if that's needed, and really laying out those expectations. Okay? So why do we do performance appraisals? Who has any ideas? Why do we bother? You know, you're out there, you're doing your work, and that's really the important thing. Why are performance appraisals important? So you could be doing the job better. Yes?
I think it's good and bad. You know, if you're not doing your job right, you can improve. But if you are doing your job right, you can earn a raise. So.
Exactly, tied to compensation, tied to the amount of raise you might get. Have any of you been in a position where you never had a performance appraisal or any feedback on your performance? Have any of you ever been there? You kind of wonder, gee, I guess I'm doing okay because no one's told me I'm not doing okay. Is that kind of how you feel? Yeah, I've been in that position as well. So it just gives you guidance and gives you a way to periodically know how you're doing. Okay? What about CAP and Joint Commission? In a lab environment, we have some regulatory requirements that we have to meet around performance appraisals as well. Okay? So kind of as we've talked about, an ongoing record of communicating to the employee, guidance in promotion decisions. You mentioned pay, but there also could be part of a performance appraisal would be having a discussion about where this person wants to go in their career and giving them growth ideas and opportunities for training in order to help them get there. And also, as you mentioned, if someone isn't doing the things that they need to do, how do they turn that around? Where are the areas where they might be a little bit deficient, and what can they do in order to get up to meet those expectations? Okay? It's also a tool for communication. If a manager is so busy and they're working on all their regular stuff and they don't have a chance to sit down with those employees and really communicate what is expected and have that feedback and allow the employee as well the opportunity to have some face time with their supervisor and discuss things that are on their mind as well. And also goals for the future. So what are the things that employee needs to do during that term of that performance appraisal? Maybe there is a specific project. Maybe they're a med tech and they want to become a senior med tech, and what kind of projects would they do in order to move into that senior status, those kind of things. Okay, also training needs. We talked a little bit about that, and people that want to advance into higher positions or different positions, career growth opportunities, then this is a really good way and a part of allowing those discussions to happen. Okay, and you also mentioned salary provides the basis for salary recommendations. We need to have objective criteria. We need to have concrete reasons why we are going to give someone an increase and what that is, and to determine what that pay increase might be based on merit. Okay, legal requirements. Tom touched a little bit on this in the application and interview process. What are some of the legal requirements? We've got to be reliable. We've got to be consistent. And this comes along with objective criteria. So when we're measuring people, we're measuring a group of, let's say we're measuring a group of technicians, we want to use the same measures. If we're looking at quantity of work, if we're looking at quality of work, all those kind of things come into being reliable and being a consistent measure. And it must be accurate. Very important that it's accurate. If we're rating an employee in a performance review on something and we're not accurate, how are you going to feel? If you're sitting across from your supervisor and they're telling you something and you're saying, but hey, wait a minute, that isn't accurate. How is that going to make you feel? Okay, so this is maybe something that you may or may not have heard before. Poorly handled or inaccurate performance appraisals are one of the more common causes of discrimination and wrongful discharge lawsuits. Okay, how to prepare. So again, the job description. So Tom talked a lot about the job description. This is part of the performance appraisal process. Our employees at ARUP actually sit down and review that job description each year and make sure that it's still accurate, because sometimes jobs start out being one thing And as they go forward, that you kind of take on more and they kind of grow and evolve over time. So it's always good to review those on a regular basis and make sure that they're still an accurate reflection. Okay, and then establishing the performance standards. Within the job description, we need to define what is not acceptable. So what performance meets the standard, what performance is below the standard, and also what performance is actually above the standard. We want it to be a challenge, but we want it to be attainable. So we don't want to give people goals and objectives and duties that are way beyond what they can reasonably do. We want to stretch them a little bit, though, and give those challenges, but it does need to be attainable. And as we talked about, it needs to be objective, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be specific. It can't be, too general or too vague. And really important that the employee has control. If you're going to rate an employee on a certain characteristic or job performance, if they don't have any control, again, how would that make you feel if you were getting a rating and you really didn't have any control to move that rating in a different direction? You don't want to use absolute terms or imprecise words. So you wouldn't want to say, if you were rating someone on attendance, you wouldn't want to say, oh, John is just lazy. He just doesn't get to work on time. How would that make you feel? That is a term that or you wouldn't want to say, John is never on time. Okay, so that's an absolute term. You would not want to do that because chances are he might be on time sometimes, right? You need to be exact and correct in how many times he might be absent or tardy. And you always, of course, don't want to discriminate against any group. Okay, and expectations. When new employees come in, they should know immediately what the expectation is so that they can start with that idea in mind so that when the performance appraisal comes around, they have that full understanding. And that comes under the training that Tom talked about as well. You want to continually give feedback to employees. Again, you do at least want to have that discussion with your supervisor or manager once a year, but the more often that they can be giving feedback on performance during the year is going to be helpful as well. Okay, some things that are helpful, again, when you're only doing a performance appraisal once in a while, and especially if you have large groups, like you're coming from specimen processing, huge group, right? A lot of employees. If a supervisor there really needs to have some mechanisms to track and to keep records so that when that time comes, and I don't know if they have leads or other people that have feedback into it. Okay, so prior to the appraisal, so you've started the preparation. You want to look at the employee's file, and again, you want to remember throughout the year what they've been doing during the course of that review, that performance review period. What we do in some cases, and you guys can tell me if you guys have had to do this, is ask the employees to do a self-appraisal. My recommendation is always that they use the same form, but I know that in some of the labs they use a different form. So it's kind of hard, isn't it? I think it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to sit down and kind of be, think about yourself and how you're performing. But that really is helpful as a basis for the supervisor to see, okay, well, I'm thinking this, and this is where I'm rating this performance, and the employee is thinking this. So that opens the door for a discussion about kind of why are we a little bit different there. So. Okay, so you're going to complete the appraisal on how well people are performing the task, how close they came to achieving goals, and any other success factors. And when I say how close they came to achieving goals, sometimes people will have goals and objectives, and they may not quite get there. That's where we're kind of making them challenging, we're making them a little bit stretch goals, but as long as we're seeing that people are really striving for that and making some good progress, we're going to take that into account. As we write those performance appraisals and consider how the employee performed. Any other success factors? Maybe people, went the extra mile. Maybe they volunteered for things. They're always the one when you need help. They're the ones that are volunteering. Maybe they went out and got an extra certification, or they completed, their ASCP, whatever it might be, that really showed that they were doing some good additional success factors. Okay, so first rule of performance evaluations, no surprises. If you sit down with your supervisor after a year and you're chuckling, have you had some surprises?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's not the ideal way we would recommend for that to happen. If things are happening during the year, employees should be hearing from their supervisors and managers as they're happening, so that they have an opportunity to correct those specific things. If the only time an employee is hearing about things is during their performance appraisals, that really isn't ideal. It should be happening much more. And would you agree to that? Okay. Okay, review the appraisal with your supervisor prior to meeting with the employees. So if you are a supervisor or a manager and you're writing an appraisal, you want to make sure that your manager at least has a chance to look at that, because they may have some additional input. They may want to chat with you about where you rated someone in a particular area, and they may want to give some input on that. So that's a good rule of thumb there. Okay, so the meeting. So this meeting for the performance appraisal, you want to schedule it in advance. You want to make it convenient. You want to make it private and comfortable. You don't want to have your cell phone, you don't want to be texting while you're doing your performance appraisal. You want to give the employee your full and undivided attention and really make it meaningful. You don't want to be rushed and all that kind of thing. This to me seems like it's just good common sense, but it's just reminders and kind of guidelines that sometimes people in a busy rush day, they might just kind of forget about some of this stuff sometimes. Okay, so conducting the appraisal. You want to put the employee at ease. I don't know about you, but I think I get nervous when I have to sit down and get my performance appraisal. Sometimes it's a little bit, it's kind of a nervous thing to do sometimes. Make it a two-way communication as the person that is conducting the appraisal, and always focus on the objective job-related behaviors. Don't focus on the person. Don't make it personal in any way, and be willing to learn new information. This is when you mentioned you didn't want to bring up something that you disagreed with.
I felt like it's a situation where it'd be easy to have somebody not want to. Does that make sense?
But what we're recommending as part of our training to you is that if you are the one writing this appraisal and conducting this appraisal, be willing to learn new information. So be willing to listen to the employees and any information that they provide that would be pertinent. Okay, so the process: review and update job description and performance standards. Rate the performance against the standards. So you've got to have those performance standards that we talked about right up front. What makes it above, what makes it below what your standard is. Give constructive feedback. Verify continuing education documentation. This is something that we do as part of the lab, being with the labs. Discuss publications, presentations, awards. There are people out there that are doing these things that want to make sure we get that captured as part of the performance appraisal as well. Okay, counseling records. So counseling records is what we at ARUP call our disciplinary process is called counseling. So if there is a HIPAA incident or there's any other kind of counseling, you want to make sure you know about that as you're getting ready to assess that performance. You want to try to obtain a commitment for future performance from the employees. Developmental goals for the next year, we talked a little bit about that already. As far as the actual form, and I'm going to show you the form. A lot of you will have already been familiar with it. I'll show you the form at the end. Both parties sign the form as part of the process. And let employees know, and maybe you guys know this and maybe you don't, you can challenge the appraisal. You can make statements on the appraisal form that become part of the permanent record, and that will always be there for anyone to see that ever has the need or the opportunity to look at that appraisal for any reason. Okay, close the meeting on a positive note. Again, this is like common sense, but it's important. And with all the good stuff. Okay, so now we've talked about the process, writing the appraisal, conducting the appraisal. Now I want to talk to you about some potential problems that we come across and we see in kind of in human nature in a way, and things to watch out for and things to keep in mind. So biased evaluations. Basing personnel action on subjective opinion constitutes bias. Biased evaluations can lead to various legal charges. And again, appraisals are often the first things that are reviewed in a legal investigation. So if we do ever find ourselves in a situation where we are in a legal situation. Maintain accurate and well-documented written records, and again, kind of repetitive, base evaluations on specific, objective, job-related behaviors. Don't want to get caught up on the bias side of things. So some of the things we see. So the halo effect. So you're a supervisor, you're getting ready to write this person's performance appraisal, and you really like them, so they can do no wrong, basically. Or maybe they're really good at one aspect of their job, or they're, and this says ARUP, a long-term ARUP employee. Maybe if they're a long-term employee, this is what we're not wanting you to do, obviously, is do these things, but these are some of the human tendencies that we see. And then on the other side, the horns. Maybe you don't like their personal style. Maybe they do a really good job and they get everything done, but for some reason, you know, some people just don't click, right? Maybe there was one incident that was an incident of poor performance, and maybe that was just last week. Maybe that was the week before you're doing the appraisal. You have to keep in mind that you're reviewing for that whole year period and not just for that recent incident. Or again, or in just one aspect of the job. So these are things we don't want to see. So we do see leniency, as I mentioned in the example that I gave earlier, where the person got really high ratings. This is the most common error. Sometimes it's just easier to give a higher rating than to really kind of give some of that more direct and sometimes difficult feedback. So we do see that sometimes. So the strictness, the leniency, central or average tendency, rating all employees the same. That isn't reality. That isn't what the world is. There's generally a curve. But there are, you know, sometimes again, it's easier for supervisors to just say, I'm going to give everyone the same rating. These are the kind of things that we are coaching you so that you know that these things should not happen. The blame game, blaming employees when things go poorly, liking those like you. Again, you know, we're all human. We have these tendencies. Reviews based on fear. So again, when we see people that maybe rate all employees the same, or they rate leniency, the most common error, maybe they're afraid. Maybe they don't want to sit across from that employee and feel like they might hurt their feelings or, you know, that kind of thing. So these are all the biases that we want everyone to avoid. Okay? Sometimes the process is not taken seriously. And again, I think as we began the discussion, this really is an important process. Supervisors and managers and even employees are very invested in performing the work, getting the work done, the day-to-day work, and sometimes they may think this performance appraisal is just something I have to do, and you know, it's just not really important. Again, especially if you've got big departments, the manager should know the job and specifically the employee's performance. Sometimes there might not be enough documentation or details on the work, the objectives, or the standards, those performance standards. And this one, the review is conducted as a lecture. Hopefully no one will tell me that you have been in a performance review and you felt like you were being lectured. Has anyone ever felt that? Okay, so subjective, it can't be subjective. It has to be those objective measures anytime you can quantify and make that really objective. It needs to be honest. And again, if someone's being too lenient or too strict, it really needs to be honest. It needs to be an honest, objective representation of that performance. Too much judging, too little listening. We don't want that at all. We don't want reprimands, or we don't want you to feel like you're being talked at. We don't emphasis on the past rather than the future. So you're viewing a period of the past, but you're also talking about what can happen in the future and focusing forward on that future. And reference to health-related issues, you never want to include any reference to health-related issues in a performance appraisal. It has no place or no business there. As part of the presentation, I don't know if you had a chance to look at these. There are some checklists that are included in the PowerPoint, and these are some things to think about. So obviously you guys aren't going to go out tomorrow and run a lab and write performance appraisals. You may have a job where you might get involved in performance appraisals even when you're going through school, or just right now. But in the future, these are tools. You can hang on to these and keep some of the things that we've talked about. So this particular page giving you things to think about as you sit down to write someone's performance appraisal. So objective data, things like sales numbers, earning reports, call records, productivity reports, just kind of giving you some things to think about as you're sitting down to write a review. Critical incidents, kudos. You always want to include those good positive things that the employees have done during the year. On the flip side, if there are complaints or concerns, customer complaints, and that kind of thing. So that's one page. Consider the following questions when assessing performance. So again, this is just going to get you thinking about a lot of the things that we've talked about today. How has the employee met this requirement? Why or why not? How do I know that? What is the supporting evidence? What is the impact on the department and on the company? That's really going to be a factor if you're assessing something in how you're going to rate that performance. If it really has a fantastic impact on the department or the company, those are just helping you think about those things. How can the employee do better? How can I do a better job of supporting this employee? And then possible reasons for poor performance. Did they get adequate training? Tom talked about that and how important that is. Do they have the skills necessary for the job? Sometimes people get into a job and it just isn't a good fit. They could do these 5 things over here fantastically, but they're in this particular job that requires other things, and it just isn't a good fit for them. So that's something that you want to consider, especially if people are struggling to perform to that performance standard and that performance level. Does the employee understand what I expect? Has anything changed in the employee's work situation? So those are, again, these are just tools that you'll be able to take and look at when you actually have the opportunity to write a performance appraisal. Just more on performance details. Errors, again, similar to what we've talked about, some of the things that are problems or errors. The first one is, have I rated the employee more highly than he or she deserves? So I won't go through all of these, but these are here for your future.